Hello, my darlings, and welcome to day 21 of the 24 days of Advent Adventure. So close to Christmas. I bring you a book that I downloaded, The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I would love a copy of Turn of the Screw. I really, really would. If anybody wants to know what to get me for my birthday next year, a copy of The Turn of the Screw would be wonderful. A lot of people tend to call it a very heavy-going book. Well, actually, it's not really a book. It's a very short story. It's a novella, but it's classic Gothic horror. It is beautifully written. I know it can be very wordy. I know that it can be very heavy with the sentences, but look beyond that to the beauty that is sitting there in front of you. It's true Gothic horror at its most finest. It's very, very old. In fact, I will tell you how old it is, because I haven't even written that down. I'm so excited to find it today. When was Turn of the Screw written? 1897 and published in 1898. Wow. It was published serially in Collier's Weekly in 1898 and published in a book form later that year. As I say, it's not big enough to be a book as such. It is more of a novella or short story. So, I mean, wow. Just going to do me some quick maths. Wow, 126 years old. I hadn't realised it was 126 years old. In fact, 127 because it was from 1897. 127 years old and it still kicks ass. It does. It's a fantastic story. It's about a governess who is hired by the uncle to Miles and Flora to go to live in Bly Manor and raise the children there. He doesn't want to see the children. All he wants is to know that she's there taking care of them as she should be, as a good governess. He doesn't even want any reports on them. And she says, yes, absolutely fine, not a problem. You know, very quite the madam. And it's only when she's at Bly Manor and she starts seeing apparitions of the previous employees, Peter, Quint, and Miss Jessel. Miss Jessel was the original governess, and she had a love affair with Peter Quint, and the pair of them mysteriously died. And now they keep coming back in their ghostly apparitions to Miles and Flora. What do these ghosts want with Miles and Flora? Do they wish to possess their very souls, their very bodies, so that they may live again? Flora is quite the precocious child. Having witnessed the death of her parents at the gates of Bly Manor, the poor child is so distraught that she can never go past that point and never leave Bly Manor. Everything takes on a very dark turn at this point, and as the apparitions, ghosts, make themselves more known to the governess and to the children, Miles and Flora, very dark turn of events start to take place. The governess feels it is her duty bound to protect those children, to be their mother, to shield them from the knowledge of life and being the loss of the innocence of the children. And she eventually sends herself mad with a psychosis and ends up with having a mental breakdown over this and makes herself incredibly ill. And try as she might, she wants to save the children, especially Miles, who seems to have the ability to be able to communicate and see ghosts. As I say, it's very dark and very twisted is this story. It's a deep, resonating gothic horror, and it suits well for Christmas, being of dark evenings. I love it. I think Henry James is a wonderful writer. He captures the essence of innocence in a child and also the deviance of a child and the eccentricness of mental illness and despair and grief and the longing and love. He just has a unique ability to be able to encompass all that within this dark novel. I found this one on the internet. Project Gutenberg ebook, The Turn of the Screw, and just you can print them off. They're free. And what an invaluable, wonderful thing the internet is, to be able to give us a book that's as old as this. It's just fantastic. And as you can see, I've been writing cliff notes on all of this. It's just phenomenal. It really is. I'm just going to read you a little bit because obviously I would. The Turn of the Screw. The story had held us round the fire, sufficiently breathless, but except the obvious remark that it was gruesome, as on Christmas Eve in an old house a strange tale should essentially be. I remember no comment utterly till somebody happened to say that it was the only case he had met in which such a visitation had fallen on a child. The case, I may mention, was that of an apparition in just such an old house as had gathered us for the occasion, an appearance of a dreadful kind. To a little boy sleeping in the room with his mother and waking her up in the terror of it, waking her not to dissipate his dread and soothe him to sleep again, but to encounter also herself before she had succeeded in doing so. The same night that had shaken him, it was this observation that drew from the Douglas, not immediately, but later in the evening, a reply that had the interesting consequence to which I call attention. Someone else told a story not particularly effective, which I saw he was not following. This I took for a sign that he had himself something to produce, and that we should only have to wait. We waited, in fact, till 2 nights later, but that same evening, before we scattered, he brought out what was in his mind. I quite agree in regard to Griffin's ghost, or whatever it was, that it is appearing first to the little boy at so tender an age, adds a particular touch, but if not the first occurrence of this charming kind, that I know to have involved a child. If the child gives the effect of another turn of the screw. What do you say to 2 children? We say, of course, somebody exclaimed, that they give 2 turns. Also, that we want to hear about them. I can see Douglas there before the fire, to which he had got up to present his back, looking down at his interlocutor with his hands in his pockets. Nobody but me till now has ever heard. It's quite too horrible. This naturally was declared by several voices to give the thing the utmost price, and our friend, with quiet art, prepared his triumph by turning his eyes over the rest of us and going on. It's beyond everything. Nothing at all that I know touches it. For sheer terror, I remember asking. He seemed to say it was not so simple as that, to be really at a loss how to qualify it. He paused his hands over his eyes, made a little wincing grimace for dreadful dreadfulness. Oh, how delicious! Cried one of the women. He took no notice of her. He looked at me. But as if instead of me he saw what he spoke of, for general uncanny ugliness and horror and pain. Well then, I said, just sit right down and begin. He turned round to the fire, gave a kick to a log, watched it in an instant, then as he faced us again, I can't begin. I shall have to send to town. There was an unanimous groan at this, and much reproach. After which, in his preoccupied way, he explained, the story's written, it's in my locked drawer. It has not been out for years. I could write to my man and enclose the key. He could send down the packet as he finds it. It was to me in particular that he appeared to pronounce this, appeared almost to appeal for aid, not to hesitate. He had broken a thickness of ice. The formation of many a winter had had his reasons for a long silence. The others resented postponement, but it was just his scruples that charmed me. I adjured him to write by the first post, and he agreed with us for an early hearing. Then I asked him if the experience in question had been his own. To this his answer was prompt. Oh, thank God, no. And is this record yours? You took the thing down? Nothing but the impression. I took that here. He tapped his heart. I've never lost it. Your manuscript is in old faded ink and in the most beautiful hand. He hung fire again. A woman's. She has been dead these last 20 years. She sent me the pages in question before she died. They are all listening now. And of course there was somebody to arch, or at any rate to draw the inference. But if he put the inference by without a smile, it was also without irritation. She was the most charming person, but she was 10 years older than I. She was my sister's governess, he quietly said. She was the most agreeable woman I'd ever known in her position. She would have been worthy of whatever it was long ago. And this episode was long before I was at Trinity, and I found her at home on my coming down the second summer. I was much there that year. It was a beautiful one, and we had in her off hours some strolls and talks in the garden, talks in which she struck me as awfully clever and nice. Oh yes, don't grin. I liked her extremely, and I am glad to this day to think she liked me too. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have told me. Had never told anyone. It wasn't simply that she said so, but that I knew she hadn't. I was sure I could see. You'll easily judge why when you hear. Because the thing had been such a scare, he continued to fix me. You'll easily judge, he repeated. You will. I fixed him too. I see. She was in love. He laughed for the first time. You are acute. Yes, she was in love. That is, she had been. That came out. She couldn't tell her story without it coming out. I saw it, and she saw it, I saw it, but neither of us spoke of it. I remember the time and place, the corner of the lawn, the shade of the great beeches, and the long, hot summer afternoon. It wasn't a scene for a shudder, but oh! He quitted the fire and dropped back into his chair. You'll receive the packet Thursday morning? I inquired. Probably not until the second post. Well then, after dinner. You'll all meet me here. He looked us around again. Isn't anybody going? It was almost the tone of hope. Everybody will stay. I will, and I will, cried the ladies whose departure had been fixed. Mrs. Griffin, however, expressed the need for a little more light. Who was it she was in love with? The story will tell, I took upon myself to reply. Oh, I can't wait for the story. The story won't tell, said Douglas, not in any literal vulgar way. More's the pity then. That's the only way I ever understand. Won't you tell us, Douglas? Somebody else inquired. He sprang to his feet again. Yes, tomorrow. Now I must go to bed. Good night. And quickly catching up the candlestick, he left us slightly bewildered. From our end of the great brown hall, we heard his step on the stair, whereupon Mrs. Griffith spoke. Well, if I don't know who she was in love with, I know who he was. She was 10 years older, said her husband. At that age, but it's rather nice, his long reticence. 40 years, Griffin put in, with this outbreak at last. The outbreak, I returned, will make a tremendous occasion of Thursday night, and everyone so agreed with me that in the light of it we lost all attention for anything else. The last story, however incomplete, and like the mere opening of a serial, had been told. We handshook and candlestuck, as somebody said, and went to bed. I knew the next day that the letter containing the key had, by the first post, gone off to his London apartments, but in spite of, or perhaps just on account of the eventual diffusion of this knowledge, we quite let him alone till after dinner, till such an hour of the evening, in fact, as might best accord with the kind of emotion on which our hopes were fixed. Then he became as communicative as he could desire, and indeed gave us his best reason for being so. And there, my darlings, I will leave it. Isn't it beautiful? The total understanding of classic English literature. Love, madness, betrayal, innocence lost, the lives, the souls of Miles and Flora. It's a classic Christmas Eve tale of terror. I hope you enjoyed it, my darlings. If I read it to you, the entire of the book, I think we'd be here for Christmas 2025. It is quite a wordy book, but in those words is a love language to Gothic horror. Thank you so much for coming and joining me on day 21. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. And if you really enjoyed it, you can always give me a follow and come back for day 22. Goodness knows what I'm going to be bringing you. Thank you very much, my darlings, for joining me. Happy readings and enjoy, and I'll see you tomorrow for day 22.